What is your fuel? What do you run on? Have you ever thought about what your fuel is? Of course, you know the answer isn't gasoline, diesel, or electricity. The real answer is actually what drives you. The word is actually motivation. If you look at the root of the word that's important for us, it's motor and move, meaning movement. The root comes from taking action. And here, of course, we ask this question, so what kind of fuel do you need to get this engine running? A coach will help you discover what your fuel is. And of course, they do this through coaching practices and tools. So where does this motivation system come into play for us? We can put it this way. If you are uncomfortable with others making decisions, if you no longer feel as happy as you used to, and if you have started to think that your desires and expectations in life are no longer being met, at this point we can look at the motivation pyramid. What is this thing we call the motivation pyramid? In fact, it is inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In other words, it describes the steps within that pyramid that a person experiences in life and in the process of self-actualization. Now, for those who are not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I want to briefly explain it right away. Imagine a pyramid and think of steps or lines going from the bottom to the top of this pyramid. At the very bottom, at the base of the pyramid, are the basic needs and sustaining life, that is satisfying hunger and having shelter. Then you move up to the next level. After that, you reach the step of securing your future, what you will do in retirement or old age, or ensuring your financial security. Then, when you reach the next level, feelings such as being respected, compassion, being accepted by society and family, and similar emotions come into play. And finally, when you reach the top of the pyramid, there is the stage of self-actualization. In our context, this means, what do you want to leave behind when you depart from this world? What do you want to be remembered for? Or what do you want people to know about you? Or what kind of benefit do you want to provide before you go? The answer to these questions is actually how you realize yourself at the top of that pyramid. At this point, what we do is identify the deficiencies at these steps of the motivation pyramid, determine which topics lower your motivation or make you unhappy, and then work on those areas. If there are some issues or disruptions in certain sections or steps of your motivation pyramid, you may experience some setbacks as you climb to the top of the pyramid, which we call self-actualization. In other words, when it comes to having your happiness and motivation actively functioning. If we can identify these, you will be able to climb those steps in a healthy way, have a higher quality journey, and possess a motivation that will help you feel better about yourself. Our style of motivation is a bit of a Turkish type. You know, we always talk about this in our trainings. When it comes to coaching, what sets us apart from others is that we actually use a new system that makes it more suitable for our culture and our emotions. So here you will also see a version of coaching that is applied in a more Turkish way. Reverse motivation works for us. Think about it. A whole generation was wasted like this. How did that happen? Because they said things like, you can't do it, you're not capable, you won't make it. This is the effect of the whip. Trying to prove yourself against all the you can'ts and you won'ts. I'll do it, you'll see, I will succeed, I'll prove myself to you. In fact, it was a lack of acceptance. In other words, it was done to be approved by others, to be accepted, and to earn their love. How effective do you think reverse motivation is with today's generation, for example, Generation Z? Yes, I see this in everyone. So it seems we also need to evaluate this generationally. In other words, when you look at the Turkish type, you actually need to be able to adapt it to the era, to today's conditions, and to the necessary situations. That's why finding the fuel here gives us exactly the answer we're looking for in the system. If you can find the other person's fuel, you also discover what will motivate them or what method will work with them. But when it comes to motivation, rather than the internal motivation that's common around the world, we tend to rely more on external sources of motivation. In other words, we determine our motivation by looking at the country's conditions, the environment, the situation, or our financial status. But while doing this, we don't really care about where and how our internal motivation works, often without even realizing it. Coaching sessions will also be beneficial for bringing together our internal and external motivations, finding their common ground, and taking this to the peak we desire. If you are truly looking to find a way to be deeply motivated, it can be said that we first need to carefully identify and lay out in detail exactly what is blocking your motivation, where these specific obstacles come from, whether the reasons are found within you or are due to other external factors. Draw that entire pyramid, and then use this professional coaching tool to make our motivation much better and more sustainable over time. You are in the right place for motivation.